This video is meant to assist you with the Beginner's Guide to Understanding Psychological Research Articles assignment. So by now you should have watched the video from the University of Minnesota, seeing how they walked through the article. And there was some really good stuff in there. I really like their advice about the order to read the article in. Do keep in mind though, you're not going to be able to get everything you need just from skimming it over really close, really quickly. But the abstract and the discussion first is really going to help you understand a lot when you go through it. Now, what I'm going to want you to do is, I don't want you to do tons and tons of detail in here. Pretend that you were going to be presenting this article at a conference and you just needed a few particular points on your PowerPoint so you can present it effectively. This is what we're looking at. And so I'm trying to get you into the mode of being able to find what is most important in the particular article. Now remember, articles are going to have some differences in the titles of what the different sections are, the orders in which they appeared, but after you look at a few articles, you're going to start getting a feel for it. So you're going to see in this particular PowerPoint, there's some different headings and stuff than are in the PowerPoint that you're going to use with the article that you pick. By the way, I do want to emphasize you're only turning in one of those, okay? I don't want anyone panicking and thinking you're doing both. You're only doing one, whichever one you want to choose. But do know that there's going to be some differences. So don't expect that that nice little recipe they gave you in the University of Minnesota video is going to be exactly the order everything's going to be in for every single article. So here, I started with a title slide. You'll see a title slide on the one that you are going to use too. And so the first thing I am looking at here, this is stuff I went and filled in, is what's the most important stuff out of the introduction. And so things to think about in the introduction is, why are they doing this? So again, using the idea of reading the abstract, all of this here is the abstract, okay? And then going down and reading the discussion, and luckily this is a pretty short article too, picking up what's going on here. And what I gathered out of this is that antisocial personality disorder, which is a personality disorder highly associated with criminal behavior, lots of impulsive sort of behavior, not caring about the rules, not caring about violating other people's rights, so on and so forth. We'll talk about that a lot more when we get to the chapter on psychological disorders. The gist of what's going on here is that in the overall general population, it's pretty rare. But when you look at people who are incarcerated, boy, it's a lot higher. So this is why they were looking at this data to see this. Now, this is not experimental research. This is a type of survey research because they interviewed these individuals and gave them some different questionnaires. So just that you're aware, I want you to start getting used to the idea of what's the difference between survey type research and descriptive type research versus experimental. This one is not an experiment. So in the introduction, this is what I gathered. Our next task here then is to figure out who the participants are. Now, in this case, you get a really nice clue up front with the abstract, but it really doesn't cover everything. So if you go further down here, what you're going to see is you've got this really nice table that tells you that there are men and women, breaks it down, how many of them have antisocial personality disorder and the like. And when you read this part called subjects and participants can mean the same thing. Participants is the more correct version of it at the present time. So if you go through that, you can find that information that helps fill in good information about your participants. The next part we're going to look at is the procedures. How did they get this data? How did this happen? And so this is just in the general methods section. There's no particular heading that says procedures, but as you read further down here, you start to see, they did some interviews. They got some demographic data. That's what you got some of your information on the participants from. And they did compensate the participants, not very much, but that's always something to notice. We also have it noted here that it was approved by the IRB, the Institutional Review Board of the University of Iowa. By the time you do this assignment, we'll have covered the lecture that talks about research ethics, and so you will know what an IRB is. So next we're going to look at the instruments, the measures is another word for it, that they use to gather their information. And articles usually describe that really quite nicely, and you can see some of that starting in the section here. And so just a brief description of the different things that they looked at. And then we're going to start looking at the results. Again, like I said in the instructions, I do not want you to get too terribly hung up about the stats at this point in your career of reading psychological articles. Concentrate on what the tables say and some of the verbal stuff with the results. So you'll find some stuff that if you look at these tables carefully, you'll see that it makes sense. And if you have questions about your own article, you can probably look back at what I'm showing you now and it'll be of assistance to you. For instance, here in Table 1, we see the differences in age, okay? And the present means the folks that had antisocial personality disorder, and absent means that they didn't. So we know that the mean age, the average age was lower. Some other things that were important that were significant. Notice that it says when it has a little marking by what is called p-value here. And again, we'll have done a lecture that covers what that is, so you'll understand what that is. You really care about the stuff that's significant. You don't really care about the stuff that's not significant because it doesn't reflect a real and meaningful difference. Going on to Table 2. Now, Table 2 here is a little bit special. The articles you're going to look at are not going to have this particular sort of stats in it. But for those of you that are curious, this thing that says OR means an odds ratio. And so here for prior mental health treatment, you see that the odds ratio is 2.4 times larger for those who have been diagnosed, and so I have it reflected over here. So if you look between these two slides, it'll give you a feel for what this is, but you're not going to deal with odds ratios in the articles I selected for you, okay? All right then. Now we also have a Table 3 that looks at other psychological disorders that these individuals had. And oh my goodness, are there a lot of psychological disorders that folks had. I didn't go down and talk specifically about each and every exact disorder, but I put them into categories. And again, this used an odds ratio. Okay. So, I had to continue this on another slide. If you find that you need to insert a slide into your PowerPoint, that's absolutely fine to do that. And then finally, we're down to Table 4, looking at this final category here. And we definitely saw, very poor functioning in these individuals with antisocial personality disorder. They also did a sub-analysis, this is quite interesting, on folks with antisocial personality disorder and ADHD. ADHD has impulsiveness as one of the characteristics that can show up in it, and in antisocial personality disorder, impulsiveness is part of what gets folks into some trouble sometimes. So not surprisingly, 33% of the people had both of those together. And there was some really rough stuff going on there in addition to those two diagnoses. So finally, we get down to the discussion. Now remember, with the pattern that was shown in the University of Minnesota video, you are reading the abstract and then the discussion. So some of the stuff that's going to be in the discussion, you will know by the time you look at those tables and stuff like that, and the other results, it'll make some sense for you. So the discussion section is labeled starting here, and you need to read through that and pick out some of the main points. So we had this very small percentage of antisocial personality disorder in the mainstream population, and as they predicted, huge number of incarcerated folks in this study had it. When you see in the general population, more men than women have antisocial personality disorder, but in the incarcerated populations, it's nearly equal, which is really quite surprising. And then some of the information from other studies that were in there that can be of interest. We also noted, as we saw in our table 3, offenders that have antisocial personality disorder have lots of other mental illnesses going on. Substance abuse was strong, and also borderline personality disorder, which is another highly impulsive disorder. Those who had ADHD and antisocial personality disorder had very severe outcomes. So you're probably a little overwhelmed right now, but believe me, this is a relatively short article. It was not hard to find this information. It does take a little time and a little getting used to it. And I very specifically chose articles for you that are quite brief and pretty easy to pull the information out of. So I think that you will find this to be an interesting exercise. And do remember, for your copies of the PowerPoint templates, I did add a section at the back for you to give me your thoughts on what you think about the article, or any ideas that you had, or any questions that you have about what's going on. I really want you to incorporate, some of the ideas from the University of Minnesota video, the questions that the speaker was suggesting that you ask yourself as you read. If you want to include something like that in there, that's good too. This is highly exploratory. You're brand new psychology students. I'm not expecting you to do this perfectly, but I want you to reach on in and roll up your sleeves and get your hands into the middle of research and start getting a little more comfortable with all of it, okay? Another section in here is limitations. I'm sorry, I started going off to the end and I forgot. Limitations are really important in research, because when you do research, you need to point out, here's stuff we could have done better. Here's something that may not make these results absolutely perfect. And again, as you know from our lecture, there's lots of stuff that makes research not perfect, but it's just being honest to bring it up. Okay. So the conclusion, the overall picture that we have there, how common it is in prison populations, lots of other mental health problems. And so it's really, really crucial that these individuals get mental health services while they're incarcerated, because the principle that we have behind why people are incarcerated is to rehabilitate them. And unfortunately, that's not happening. So this article has a very powerful application for people that want to advocate for people who are incarcerated getting better mental health services. You will find while taking this class, and as you take other psychology classes, which I sincerely hope you do, whether with me or someone else, that the power of psychological research has a long reach and can have a profound effect on society, and it can really do a lot to improve the well-being of people. I hope that you found this useful. Please do email me if you have any questions. Thanks.